Hello, friends and extended family. Brian James here again. I was watching a conversation unfold between some of my fellow adoptees, and there was some contention, some communication breakdown, etc. And it seems to be getting more and more so. The egos are really starting to come out in the adoption community, as well as some entitlement and a lot of political agenda leaching into our support groups. So, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, a person was struggling due to some international adoptees supposedly suggesting that the opening of records for American adoptees was somehow not relevant and working against international adoptees, which is absolutely ridiculous. Neither of those things are exclusive to one another. So, rights, it's just like in Canada, whereas we have now had the residential school children of the indigenous culture here has been addressed, that what was done was wrong and whatnot. And good for them, because the residential schools are basically another form of adoption, is what it is, really. But that being said, um, let's not forget about the just regular adoptees in general in Canada that have not had their day in court, have not been apologized to, and at that juncture, basically, when an adoptee in Canada goes into, get some mental health treatment, this, that, and the other, and they suggest that adoption has been causing them trauma issues, CPTSD, etc., that it's not recognized until a federal statement is put out for that group of people. Then it's not official that adoption would cause any trauma, regardless of if the prime minister came out when addressing the residential school system and said the worst part about it was the fact that these people had been removed from their culture, their language, their ethnicity, their backgrounds, etc., which is exactly the case with almost every adoptee. Of course, we always have those fringe things where people are adopted by their family, like within their family, or you get that one weird lady out there that comes into the adoption support groups telling everyone how great adoption is, and then we find out that she went to church as a middle-aged adult woman and had two elderly people adopt her, and she thinks she's an adoptee. Not quite the same. So, I mean, if you're someone who considers themselves an adoptee and you willingly went out and had yourself adopted as a responsible adult, that's kind of it's not really related to our struggle at all. But back to my point here is that there is agendas, and adoption is one great big agenda, which basically allows the governing body to take control of who gets to raise children, right? And research James Watson, and maybe you'll understand better that when you take a baby and you control the environment and their stimulus, you are basically shaping the future of that human being, right? And nothing is set in stone, of course, but it's just like anything. You have to look at statistics. So if you do X to a baby, statistically, you will have X percentage chance of X, some outcome. So it's important to understand the science behind it. It's important to understand the psychology behind it. And at the same token, it's a very good idea to step back and realize you're dealing with two things here. You're dealing often with your own personal circumstances, which can be very painful and make it very difficult to objectively consider the variables involved in other adoption scenarios. So I guess the point is to try to look at things and see both sides instead of just seeing one side. So what did the world say to us as adoptees? Well, that's totally normal, and you have no real reason to feel bad about it. Well, in talking to enough adoptees, you come to understand that that's not true, and that's not very fair to someone to let them go on feeling like losing your entire family isn't something to mourn over. It is. The other things to consider are that there's good and bad people in all walks of life. That includes adoptees, birth mothers, adoptive parents, etc. And so when we talk about a birth mother, well, some people want to jump to the idea that the birth mother's the bad person or the birth parents. Some people want to jump to the conclusion that if it wasn't for the adopters, that they're the bad people, this wouldn't have happened to us, etc. And that's just not the way to really wrap your head around it, right? So the problem arises in that, there may be a birth mother out there that didn't want anything to do with that child, looks at children like modern slut walk attendees or like some of these extreme pro-abortion people that seem to get some kind of sexual gratification or something about killing babies. Now, I am pro-choice, and in actuality, I think abortion is a better way to go than adoption, because, well, I believe in heaven and things like that. So is a baby. If a baby is aborted before conception or before the birth, well, then that spirit is just going to go right back to heaven. But if you bring that baby into the world and subject it to adoption and the psychological trauma of knowing that the baby's mother did not want him or her, or that there's all sorts of things, but it's very tough to go through life knowing you weren't wanted by your mother. That's big. So ultimately, we need to be able to assess those things for ourselves, and we have to be able to look at the larger picture as well, and we have to ask the questions of why is adoption happening? Why, if it's such a terrible thing for adoptees, which it often is, why does it continue to grow year after year? Why does it get bigger? Why does it take different forms? Why does it, go over to international adoption when all of a sudden the stem of white babies, or American babies slows down? Why does this thing have to keep going? Right? So there's lots of reasons, but at the end of the day, we have some big problems with adoption. A closed adoption, you are hiding the truth and origins and history from that human being. You're cutting them off from their family tree. It's an organism. A family is an organism, right? Just like a society is an organism. It works. It's a thing. And if you cut something from it, well, that thing is cut off from its nutrients. It's cut off from its source, right? So it becomes difficult, especially in a secular atheist society, because a lot of you people don't believe in God. A lot of you people don't believe in spirit. A lot of you people think, we're walking bags of meat. So what difference does it make? Well, for those, I mean, it's maybe it doesn't matter, right? Maybe it doesn't matter. But I think for someone who believes in the fact that you have a mental plane of existence, you have a spiritual plane of existence, and you have a physical plane of existence tied together with emotions, that some of these things are important. I think they are. So ultimately, if you're anti-adoption, well, I guess that must mean, to some extent, that you believe that a child belongs with its mother, right? So what sort of agendas go against that? Well, I guess some feminism maybe goes against that. When we see things like slut walks, if you think that giving birth to a child is disgusting, if you think children are disgusting, well, there it is. So yeah, when it comes to adoption, we are talking about modern day slavery, in my opinion. Of course, it's sold as something different. And, it doesn't take a very big stretch of imagination to go back in time a few hundred years and potentially go to, Africa or something like that, and trying to imagine the way in which slavery came to be. So captured enemy combatants, maybe. But I don't see it as a big stretch to say that it's quite possible that there was forces at work that approached villages and took less technically advanced children on the premise that they'd be getting a better life than what some of those more less technologically advanced villages may be able to comprehend fully. So when we say, "Hey, mother, we'd like to give your child a better life," well, that's a really good sales pitch, right? Because a mother wants the best for her child. And if you can convince her that she's not the best for her child, well then, there you go. But you see, that's the culture we live in now, whereas women have been tricked into thinking that motherhood is not the apex of their purpose in life. To rear, nurture, and be the guardian of a divine human child. What more could anyone strive for? What a blessing. What an amazing vocation. What an amazing archetype that is. You grow the child within yourself. You're provided with food and sustenance for that child. That child literally comes from you. Wow. And, as a child who was deprived of that archetype, I can tell you that was the subconscious, unconscious driving force to find someone to fill that empty archetypal role within my psyche. And you know what? I never did. I never did. And I have suffered for it. I have suffered tremendously for it. It has caused me, to run around like a chicken with my head cut off, not knowing exactly what it was I was missing. But, yeah, I mean, it's incredible. So ultimately, if you want to get over the finger pointing of adoption, my suggestion and recommendation to you, the viewer, is to do a little reading in the macrocosm sociological sort of look at things. To look at things like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and how motherhood is portrayed, and how children are portrayed in that type of society. And then ask yourself, is that not slightly just down the road from us, or is that very close to what we have right now? At one time, that was a horrific, apocalyptical, not apocalyptical, a terrifying paradigm to consider, and yet we are rapidly moving in that direction. And we seem to be getting a lot of the 1984 as well. I used to think it would be one or the other, but it appears we're going to get both. So anyways, there was another movie out just not too long ago, and I forget the name of it, but in that one, they'd take a baby home. If it cried and cried and cried, they'd take it back and get a different one. And then they'd kill the baby there. And it was normalized. So anything can be normalized. But when you sit with yourself and consider something to be, whether it's right or wrong, there's an internal compass that will tell you that. You've got to overcome some of your own selfish needs to be able to access this sort of stuff. Like if you just don't want the responsibility, well, then of course you're going to work on, the idea that it's okay to ditch your responsibility. You're a special person. You're doing the selfless thing, right? But you have to lie to yourself, right? But if you can get honest with yourself and you can see the truth of these things, well, discernment will come. Doing some research in the way of propaganda, because quite often you're sold a faulty premise. All right, so just like how they got women to start smoking back by Edward Bernays, basically telling the debutantes of the time that they were being oppressed by men, and men were all smoking and enjoying this thing, and women were oppressed because it was a taboo for women to smoke. So Bernays had all the debutantes of the time get up on a Macy's Day Parade, I believe it was, and smoke, and they called it liberty torches, right? That women were liberating themselves by smoking poison. So be vigilant. Ask yourself questions. Be smart. Because this is how they get you. They dupe you by tugging on your heartstrings, on preying on your empathy, but you have to discern whether there is actually a cause to be empathetic, or if someone is just manipulating you, because that's what it is. It's mass manipulation on a incredible level. And here's just a quick recommendation for anyone who really wants to try and wrap their head around the mainstream narrative versus reality, because there is a difference. And I'd highly recommend you Google Plato's Cave animated version, something like that. It's about a 10, there's different versions. There's about, 8 to 15 minute versions. And it gives you a good understanding of the of how to view living in society. Okay, but ultimately I want people to be able to balance themselves, and find that center path without becoming fanatical, without becoming rabid, without becoming feral, and without slipping into degeneracy. So, as adoptees, we're all in this together. And ultimately, what are we striving for? The basic human rights that everyone else around us has, which is to not be lied to, not have information kept from us, especially vital information to us, our vital statistics in actuality, and our medical histories, our ancestral histories. Because I can tell you that, whether you're a black child being adopted into a white family, or a Ukrainian child being adopted into a Scottish family, either which way you look at it, your evolution and your DNA and your biological material have been following a different path, and that has now been interrupted. When people say you're in the fog, well, you can say you have the best adoptive parents in the world, but you have to accept the fact that whether they were good or bad, you, the adoptee, are still saddled with some Stockholm syndrome, because an adoptee is going to have a higher empathy and be more hypervigilant. So you're going to justify your adoptive parents, right? So the key, I think, is to strive towards objectivity to the best of your ability, and to get as far away from justification as possible, and just sit with the reality, and there's going to be hurt, and that doesn't entitle you to go out and hurt others. But until you get to that hurt and are able to sit with it and go through the stages of grief, well, if you don't, you're just never going to move forward. You're going to be stuck. So for those adoptees out there that are yelling and screaming, and they're happy that they've found other people that want to point fingers, well, that's fine, but it's not fine. You should really work on overcoming these things for yourself, and helping to expunge some of that anger. And absolutely, you have a reason to be angry. But at the same token, the key is to get over it and then move into a position where you can do more to help, advocate, reform, etc. And doing that in whatever way you feel positive. I don't feel comfortable chatting up with politicians, because I think they're kind of scummy. But I like talking to you guys. So I make these videos and try to put some of my thoughts and ideas and insights into them. And hopefully, occasionally I have a little epiphany that also works to educate, help, or alleviate some of the loneliness of another adoptee. Right? So we do what we can. I'm still working on my book. I've taken a couple weeks just to kind of process. The first 4 chapters were a little bit hard getting out, but I look forward to continuing on, and hopefully by the end of the year I'll have something that is potentially publishable. All right. So take care. I love you all, and just try to avoid the propaganda. Try avoid getting sucked into these emotional marketing campaigns, etc. And try not to walk into these conversations offended, right? Looking for someone to attack. Try to go in there with the positive intention of trying to share information and move forward. Thanks.